Welcome to Life Stories, where we share inspiring tales of kindness, perseverance, and unexpected journeys. In today's story, we follow Emily, a young woman facing overwhelming challenges but staying true to her values. When she finds a wallet full of money, her decision to return it leads her into a life-changing encounter with Mr. Harrison, a man who believes in the power of honesty and integrity. Join us as we explore how one small act of kindness can alter the course of someone's life. Please subscribe to our channel to begin today's story and many more inspiring journeys. It was a brisk morning in New Jersey, the kind of chilly autumn day that nipped at your skin, urging you to bundle up tightly against the wind. The leaves, golden and red, fluttered on the trees like confetti, dancing with the wind before falling to the ground in heaps. Emily had just finished her part-time job at the local cafe and was walking down the street towards the bus stop, a faint smile on her face as she thought about how she would spend the rest of her day. She was used to the quiet of this suburban neighborhood, the homes lined up neatly along the streets with their manicured lawns and picket fences. As she walked past the usual row of houses, her eyes fell upon a leather wallet that had been carelessly discarded on the pavement. The brown leather gleamed in the weak sunlight, looking out of place on the gray sidewalk. It was a strange sight. People usually took care of their belongings, especially something as important as a wallet. But here it was, abandoned as if it were nothing. Emily's heart skipped a beat as she bent down to pick it up, her fingers brushing against the smooth surface of the wallet. It wasn't just any wallet, it was thick with what seemed to be a large amount of cash. The realization hit her almost immediately. This was someone's money. And it wasn't hers. Her first instinct was to keep walking. She could slip it into her bag, forget about it, and no one would ever know. After all, Emily was in a difficult situation. Her mother, a kind woman who had been battling a severe illness for months, needed medication that they couldn't afford. The thought of her mother's worsening condition weighed heavily on Emily's shoulders. She had worked tirelessly to make ends meet, but no matter how hard she tried, there never seemed to be enough. Maybe this money could be the answer she'd been looking for. She stood still for a moment, the wallet clutched tightly in her hands. Her mind raced with thoughts. What should I do? The temptation was overwhelming, but as she stood there, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling in the pit of her stomach. Emily had been raised by her mother to always do the right thing, to never take what didn't belong to her. It wasn't just about honesty, it was about integrity. About being the kind of person who could look themselves in the mirror at the end of the day. And as much as her mother's health depended on this money, Emily knew that taking something that didn't belong to her would not sit right with her. I can't, she whispered under her breath, as if trying to convince herself. I can't do it. Emily took a deep breath, made a quick decision, and started looking around, hoping to see someone who might have dropped the wallet. She stood on tiptoe, trying to peer over the hedges of the nearby houses. But the street was quiet. There was no one in sight. She hesitated again, the weight of the money in her hand almost pulling her into a different direction. Yet, with a deep sense of responsibility, Emily decided she would not keep the money. Instead, she needed to find the owner and return it. It was the right thing to do. After a few moments of uncertainty, she walked over to the nearest house, a well-kept home with a lush garden. The door was ajar, and as Emily stepped closer, she heard muffled voices from inside. She knocked softly, her heart pounding. A man, tall and well-dressed, answered the door with a surprised expression. "Can I help you?" he asked, his eyes scanning her up and down. Emily felt her palms sweat. "I'm sorry to bother you, sir," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "but I found this wallet on the street just a little ways down. I think it might belong to someone in this neighborhood." The man's eyes narrowed, as if he were processing what she was saying. Then, his gaze softened, and a glimmer of understanding flickered in his eyes. "Oh, that's my wallet," he said, his tone shifting from cautious to relieved. "Thank you for bringing it to me." Emily handed over the wallet, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. She had done the right thing. As she turned to leave, she couldn't help but notice the man's headset, The kind of device that suggested he was someone important, perhaps a businessman. Or someone with a busy life. He hadn't said much, but his presence left an impression on her. Just as she began to walk away, the man called out to her. "Wait a minute, young lady, are you sure you don't need this money? It's quite a lot. You know, maybe you could use it for something important." Emily froze, her heart thumping in her chest. "No, sir, I can't take something that isn't mine. Please, I did what I thought was right." The man's expression shifted from one of curiosity to something warmer. "You're a very honest person," he said, his voice filled with something like admiration. "I can see that. It's rare to find someone who values integrity these days." Emily nodded awkwardly, her feet shifting on the pavement. She wasn't used to compliments. She had always been the quiet girl, the one who kept her head down and focused on doing what needed to be done. "Thank you, sir. I just couldn't keep it." The man smiled at her as she walked away. But Emily couldn't help but feel a little lighter, knowing she had made the right choice. As she headed towards the bus stop, her mind swirled with thoughts of her mother, and the weight of the decision she had just made. It wasn't easy, but it was the kind of decision that would define her character for years to come. And as she boarded the bus, she could only hope that someday, someone would do the same for her mother, that someone would help when help was needed the most. But little did Emily know, this small act of kindness, this simple decision to do what was right, was about to change the course of her life forever. As Emily sat on the bus, her mind replayed the events of the morning over and over. She hadn't thought much about it at the time, but now that she had some distance, the whole encounter felt surreal. The man, Mr. Harrison, had been kind, and although he had insisted she could take the money, Emily had stood her ground. She had felt proud of herself for making the right decision. But at the same time, she couldn't ignore the overwhelming weight of her mother's medical bills that seemed to grow heavier each day. Still, Emily wasn't the type to allow desperation to define her actions. The bus ride felt unusually long, the quiet streets outside slipping by unnoticed as her mind was elsewhere. It was only when she reached the stop near her apartment complex that she snapped out of her thoughts and stood up, her legs stiff from sitting too long. As she walked back toward her building, the crisp autumn air felt refreshing, but the tight knot in her stomach remained. Later that afternoon, after a quick lunch, Emily was doing some house chores when the phone rang. It was an unknown number, but something about it caught her attention. She picked up the receiver, her voice soft and uncertain. "Hello? Hello, Emily," a deep voice came through, smooth and calm. "This is Mr. Harrison. I hope I'm not disturbing you." Emily's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected to hear from him again. "No, you're not disturbing me," she said, trying to sound composed. "Is everything okay?" "I'm doing well. Thank you for asking. I actually wanted to speak with you about something. Would you be able to come over to my house later this afternoon? I need your help with something important," he said. The request caught Emily off guard. She felt a bit uneasy, but there was something about his tone that seemed sincere. Perhaps he needed assistance with something. "Of course, I can be there in about an hour," she replied. When Emily arrived at Mr. Harrison's house, she was met by a warm smile and a firm handshake. His house was as impressive on the inside as it had been on the outside, elegant, yet inviting, with high ceilings and soft lighting that made the place feel both luxurious and comfortable. He led her into a spacious sitting room where they sat down across from one another. "I'll get straight to the point, Emily," Mr. Harrison began, his expression now serious. "I've been having issues with my housekeeper, Megan. I think she's been stealing from me. But every time I try to confront her, she denies it. I'm not sure what to do." Emily blinked, stunned by the turn the conversation had taken. Megan? She couldn't picture the housekeeper doing such a thing. But Mr. Harrison looked genuinely troubled. "I've watched you today," he continued. "I know that you have an innate sense of honesty. That's why I'm asking for your help. I want you to keep an eye on Megan and see if she's doing anything suspicious." Emily wasn't sure what to think. She didn't feel comfortable with the idea of spying on someone, But there was something about Mr. Harrison's demeanor that made her want to help him. Maybe it was the trust he had placed in her. Or maybe it was the fact that he was asking for help from someone who had shown such integrity earlier in the day. "I'll help you," she said, her voice steady. "But how do you want me to go about this?" Mr. Harrison leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Just observe her. See if you can catch her in the act. If you notice anything suspicious, let me know. I trust you." The next few days passed in a blur for Emily. She would visit Mr. Harrison's house on her way home from work, as instructed, spending her time in the large, open kitchen while keeping a discreet eye on Megan. At first, there was nothing to see. Megan went about her duties, cleaning, cooking, and taking care of the house as usual. But Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. There was an air of tension that hung around Megan, like she was always on edge when Mr. Harrison was around. One afternoon, as Emily was washing the dishes in the kitchen, she overheard a muffled conversation from the other room. Megan was talking to someone on the phone, but Emily couldn't make out the words. She tried to ignore it, but something inside her urged her to listen closer. When the conversation ended, Emily quickly finished her task and left the kitchen to find Megan acting unusually nervous. The housekeeper fumbled with a stack of papers and quickly hid them away in a drawer when she noticed Emily coming toward her. That was when it clicked. Emily had seen Megan hide things before, small items, things she didn't think anyone would notice. But this was different. She had no idea what Megan was hiding. But it was clear that something wasn't right. Emily's heart raced as she debated what to do next. She couldn't accuse Megan without proof. But she also couldn't ignore the growing sense of suspicion in her gut. Later that evening, as Mr. Harrison returned from work, Emily asked to speak with him privately. "I think I may have seen something," she said, her voice cautious. "Megan, she's acting strangely. She's hiding things, and I'm not sure what it is. I think there might be more going on here than meets the eye." Mr. Harrison's expression darkened. "I knew it," he muttered under his breath. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention. We need to confront her. It's time to find out the truth." As the tension built between them, Emily couldn't help but feel conflicted. She had agreed to help Mr. Harrison, but now, the weight of her actions felt heavy. Confronting Megan, a woman who had worked for Mr. Harrison for years, was bound to be difficult. But it was the only way to uncover the truth. The next chapter of Emily's journey was about to unfold, and it promised to bring unexpected revelations. The following day, after Emily had shared her observations with Mr. Harrison, things moved quickly. They had agreed that confronting Megan would be necessary. But Emily couldn't help the growing sense of unease that sat in her stomach. How could she be sure of Megan's guilt? She had seen the housekeeper hide things, but there was no solid proof, nothing concrete. Yet, in her heart, Emily knew she couldn't let this suspicion fester. The truth had to come out, no matter how difficult it might be. Later that evening, Mr. Harrison invited Emily back to his home for the confrontation. The air felt tense as he opened the door, his face tight with worry. "Thank you for coming," he said softly, stepping aside to let her in. Emily could see the stress etched on his face. She wasn't sure what she expected to happen, but she knew this would change everything. Inside, the house was eerily quiet. The usual hum of the housekeeper's movements was absent, and Emily immediately felt the weight of the moment. Mr. Harrison led her to the sitting room where he had asked Megan to meet them. As they sat in silence, Emily's heart pounded. The door opened, and Megan stepped in, her eyes darting between Mr. Harrison and Emily, trying to gauge the situation. "Megan," Mr. Harrison began, his voice firm but calm. "I need to talk to you. Emily here has been helping me with something, and we've uncovered some troubling things. It's time for you to be honest with me." Megan's face paled, and Emily could see her stiffen, her hands nervously clutching the hem of her apron. I don't know what you mean." Megan stammered. "What are you accusing me of?" Emily felt a pang of sympathy for the woman standing before her. She could tell Megan was terrified, but something in the housekeeper's body language betrayed her. There was a quiet desperation, a guardedness that spoke volumes. It was the same nervous energy Emily had noticed before, and it only confirmed her suspicions. Mr. Harrison continued, his voice steady. I've seen the signs. You've been hiding things, Megan. Not just small things, important things. And it's clear you've been taking money from me when I wasn't looking. The silence that followed was deafening. Megan's face turned a deep shade of red. And for a moment, she seemed frozen, as if trying to process the accusation. Finally, her shoulders slumped, and she let out a heavy sigh. I didn't want you to find out, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't want to lose my job. Things have been hard, so hard. And I thought maybe just this once, I could take a little. I'm sorry. Emily watched as the truth slowly came out, the weight of the confession hanging heavy in the room. Megan's eyes filled with tears. But Mr. Harrison's expression remained resolute. You've betrayed my trust, Megan, he said quietly, his disappointment evident. But I'm not going to let you destroy yourself over this. I'll give you the chance to leave with some dignity. But you can't work here anymore. The room was silent for a few moments as Megan wiped away her tears. Thank you for understanding, she whispered, before turning to leave. After the confrontation, Mr. Harrison sighed heavily, his shoulders slumping with exhaustion. Thank you, Emily, he said softly. I don't know what I would have done without you. You've done more for me today than I can ever repay. Emily didn't know how to respond. She hadn't expected it to be so emotional. In her mind, she had only done what she thought was right. She hadn't realized how deeply Mr. Harrison had been affected by his trust in Megan being shattered. And how much he appreciated her honesty. As the evening wore on, Mr. Harrison and Emily sat in the sitting room, talking quietly about life, about trust, and about the things that really mattered. The conversation shifted to Emily's own life, and she shared with him the struggles she had faced in caring for her sick mother. Working tirelessly to keep everything afloat, she spoke of her dreams, of how she hoped to someday finish school. But how hard it seemed to make progress. I know it's difficult, Mr. Harrison said after a long pause. Life has a way of throwing challenges at us when we least expect them. But what I've learned over the years is that kindness, integrity, and empathy are worth more than money. You've already shown me that today. Emily couldn't help but smile at his words. It wasn't often that people took the time to recognize her efforts, to see the things she valued most. It was humbling, and she felt a sense of pride swelling in her chest. That means a lot, Mr. Harrison, she said quietly. It really does. Suddenly, Mr. Harrison stood up, walking over to a nearby table. When he returned, he was holding an envelope. I know this isn't much, he said as he handed it to her. But I want you to have this. You've earned it. Emily opened the envelope to find a check made out for a generous amount. Far more than she had ever imagined she could earn in a single paycheck. But it wasn't just the money that caught her attention. Inside the envelope was a note. One that read, for your mother's medication and to help you with your education. I'm placing you on a scholarship. Never forget that you have a future. And it's worth fighting for. Tears filled Emily's eyes as she looked up at Mr. Harrison, unable to find the right words. I don't know what to say, she whispered, her voice breaking. Thank you so much. Mr. Harrison smiled warmly. You don't have to say anything, Emily. Just know that you've made a difference in my life. And now, I'm honored to help you. As Emily left Mr. Harrison's home that evening, the chill of the air felt lighter somehow. She had never expected this turn of events. But as she looked at the check in her hand, she realized that this was more than just money, it was a chance. A chance for her mother to get the treatment she needed. And a chance for Emily to pursue the dreams she had almost given up on. It was a reminder that even in the most difficult of times, kindness and integrity could light the way forward. And sometimes, life's greatest rewards came when you least expected them. As Emily walked back home that evening, the crisp autumn air no longer seemed so cold. With the check in her hand and a heart full of gratitude, she felt a sense of hope she hadn't known in a long time. The burden of her mother's medical bills, which had seemed insurmountable just a day ago, now felt like a challenge she could face. It wasn't just the money that had touched her deeply. But the kindness and faith Mr. Harrison had shown her, his belief in her, his understanding of the value of honesty and hard work, was the real gift. She knew her journey was far from over, but this moment, this unexpected act of kindness, was a reminder that the world wasn't as cold and uncaring as it sometimes seemed. People, like Mr. Harrison, existed, people who saw value in others even when they couldn't see it in themselves. It was these moments of humanity that gave her strength to keep going. To keep fighting for her mother. For her future. Emily entered her apartment, and as she gazed at her mother, who was resting in bed, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She would get her the medication she needed, and she would pursue her dreams, no matter how hard it seemed. Because in the end, she had learned that integrity, kindness, and perseverance always had a way of leading to something better. Thank you for watching this story. To hear more life stories and inspiring journeys, make sure to subscribe to our channel for new videos. Keep believing in yourself, because every act of kindness can create ripples that change lives.